I woke up to find my classic Mustang missing, right from my own driveway. Turns out, HOA Karen had it towed, claiming it was an eyesore. But 24 hours later, when her brand new SUV vanished from her driveway, she finally learned what happens when you mess with the wrong neighbor. Collision hit subscribe for more real stories of karma, justice, and sweet neighborhood payback. The morning started out like something from a commercial, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, the faint sound of birds, and the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee. I remember thinking how rare it was to have a morning this calm. Usually, my weekdays were a blur of deadlines, calls, and constant noise. But that Friday? That one felt special. I grabbed my favorite mug, the one with a faded picture of my Mustang printed on it, and stepped out onto the front porch. The world felt quiet, peaceful, and still. The dew on the grass shimmered like glass beads, and the air had that crisp early summer smell, fresh cut lawns, warm concrete, and the faint trace of engine oil from the garage. And there it was, my pride and joy, a 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback, sitting in my driveway like a piece of living art. Midnight blue, freshly waxed, sunlight catching the chrome bumper. That car wasn't just something I owned. It was something I built. I'd spent 3 years restoring it, nights after work, weekends that turned into mornings, and more scraped knuckles than I could count. I'd saved up for every part, every panel, every drop of paint. When I finally turned the key that first time and heard that low growl rumble through the garage, it was like hearing a heartbeat. That car was my therapy, my hobby, and my escape rolled into one. So there I was, leaning on the porch rail, sipping coffee, admiring the way the sunlight hit the hood just right, when I heard it. The sharp, unmistakable click of a pair of heels on the pavement. Click, click, click. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our homeowners association. HOA president for 5 years running, unopposed every time because no one wanted to deal with her. She was in her late 40s, always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting, and she carried a clipboard like a badge of honor. And that morning, she was pacing up and down the sidewalk across from my house, staring at my Mustang like it had personally offended her. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe she was out for a walk, or checking mailboxes again like she loved to do. But no. Every few steps, she'd stop, squint, and jot something down on that clipboard. Then she'd shake her head like she'd just seen something horrible. I sighed. Here we go again. Karen had always had a problem with, well, everything. Last month it was my neighbor's trash cans being too visible from the street. Before that, she accused a single mom on our block of using non-HOA approved mulch. I once saw her leave a handwritten violation notice on someone's door because their wreath was the wrong seasonal color. So it was only a matter of time before she set her sights on me. I tried to ignore her. I really did. I took another sip of coffee, told myself, don't engage. Not today. But then she started muttering to herself loud enough for me to hear. Unsightly, completely out of character for the neighborhood, what even is this? I turned my head slowly and caught her looking straight at my car, shaking her head in disapproval. Her expression was that perfect mix of disgust and superiority, the kind you only see on people who think they run the world. Morning, Karen. I called out, pretending not to notice her glare. She stiffened, clearly not expecting me to be cheerful. Morning, she replied, in that clipped tone she used when she wanted to sound polite but couldn't quite hide her disdain. Beautiful day, isn't it? I added, deliberately stepping down from the porch and giving my car an affectionate pat on the hood. Her eyes flicked between me and the Mustang. It would be, she said slowly, if that thing wasn't parked there. I blinked, caught off guard. You mean, in my driveway? Yes, she said, crossing her arms. We have community guidelines about maintaining modern appearances. That vehicle doesn't exactly fit the standard. For a second, I thought she was joking. I even laughed a little. Karen, it's a classic. A collectible. It's older than both of us combined, and it's beautiful. She gave me a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maybe to some people. But the HOA has an image to uphold. You wouldn't want the neighborhood to start looking like a used car lot, would you? And there it was, the insult disguised as concern. That was Karen's signature move. Karen, I said carefully, the car is in my driveway. It's registered, insured, and I keep it spotless. I'm not violating any rules. She glanced at her clipboard again, scribbled something down and said, "We'll see." Then she turned on her heel and walked away. Click, click, click. I stood there for a long moment, watching her go, the sound of her heels echoing in the still morning air. My peaceful Friday had officially taken a turn. Inside, I tried to shake it off. I told myself she was bluffing, just another empty HOA power play. But as I set my mug down on the counter, I couldn't help but feel that familiar twinge of unease in my gut. Karen didn't make threats she didn't plan to follow through on. Later that day, as I was leaving for work, I caught sight of her again. This time, she was talking to one of the HOA's maintenance guys, pointing at my house, my driveway, and then scribbling something on her clipboard again. The man nodded and took a photo of my car. That's when I knew she was serious. The calm, perfect morning that had started with birdsong and coffee had turned into something else entirely, the opening scene of a neighborhood showdown I didn't ask for. I had no idea then just how far Karen was willing to go. Or that by the end of it all, she'd lose far more than just her pride. If there's one thing everyone in our neighborhood agreed on, it's that Karen loved control. Not order. Not peace. Control. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the self-appointed monarch of our little suburban kingdom. And like any ruler, she had her loyal subjects, and her enemies. To the new neighbors, she came across as helpful, showing up on move-in day with a binder full of HOA guidelines and a smile that could curdle milk. "We just have standards," she'd say. "We want our neighborhood to stay exclusive." But the veterans, the ones who'd been here long enough, knew the truth. The HOA meetings weren't about maintaining beauty or safety. They were about power, plain and simple. Karen didn't just enforce rules. She made them. I first met her about 3 years ago, right after I moved in. She came knocking the same day the moving truck left, clipboard in hand. "Welcome," she chirped, eyes already scanning my yard. "You'll find we take pride in keeping everything uniform around here." Before I could even thank her, she was pointing things out. The grass must be under 3 inches at all times. No decorative flags unless approved. Driveways must remain clear of non-HOA vehicles overnight. I remember thinking, what on earth is a non-HOA vehicle? It didn't take long to learn that meant anything Karen didn't personally like. She ran the monthly meetings like a courtroom drama. Picture this, a community clubhouse full of folding chairs, a long table at the front, and Karen standing like a judge behind her gavel. Yes, she actually bought herself one. "Order," she'd say, tapping it dramatically on the table. "We'll begin with community infractions." Then she'd read off a list: grass too tall, paint color slightly off, garden gnomes too visible, as if these were federal crimes. Most people just nodded, apologized, and promised to correct whatever Karen didn't approve of. No one wanted to get on her bad side. Because once you did, you'd be dealing with the full force of her clipboard crusade. There was one guy, my neighbor Rick, who once parked his RV on the street for 2 days while he cleaned it out. Karen called a tow truck, not once but twice, and when that didn't work, she called the sheriff's non-emergency line claiming it was abandoned property. Rick fought it and won, but he moved out 3 months later. He told me before he left, "Man, living here is like being in prison with lawns." I laughed then. But after what happened to my Mustang, those words would start echoing in my head. Karen's obsession with rules bordered on theatrical. Every morning, she'd walk the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, pencil tucked behind her ear, inspecting every property. She called it her community quality check. We called it the Karen Patrol. If a trash can was visible, you'd get a note. If a kid left a bike out, you'd get a warning. If your grass was a little brown, you'd get a fine. She once told me she spent about 3 hours a day on HOA business. And the way she said it, proud, almost smug, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about keeping things nice. It was about keeping control. Now, here's where it got ironic. Despite all her talk about neighborhood standards, her own property wasn't exactly a model of perfection. Sure, her hedges were trimmed and her mailbox sparkled, but she'd quietly expanded her driveway a year ago, just wide enough to fit her precious white BMW X5 and her husband's truck side by side. Rumor was, she'd done it without getting the proper city permit. But no one dared report her. Why? Because Karen was the HOA. She signed the checks, handled the complaints, and even reviewed her own violations. Talk about a conflict of interest. She'd turned the HOA into her personal weapon. If she liked you, your violations disappeared. If she didn't, you could be fined for something as petty as having an unapproved mailbox font. One poor woman, Linda from down the street, had to repaint her entire fence because Karen claimed the shade of white she used was too creamy. When Linda protested, Karen sent her 3 notices in 1 week. Linda eventually gave up and hired painters to redo the whole thing. Same color, new receipt, and magically the problem went away. That was Karen's power. She could make people surrender out of sheer exhaustion. After she confronted me about my Mustang, I started noticing just how much fear she inspired. Neighbors would literally cross the street to avoid her. I'd see curtains twitch when she passed by, people pretending to be on phone calls just so they didn't have to talk to her. And yet, no one stood up to her. Because fighting Karen wasn't just annoying, it was expensive. She'd find some obscure clause, file formal complaints, and drown you in paperwork until you gave up. So most people played nice. But not me. Not this time. That night, I told my wife what happened. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might stick that way. She seriously said, "Your car doesn't fit the aesthetic?" she asked. "Yup," I said, flipping through the HOA handbook she dropped off years ago. "And you know what's funny? There's nothing in here about vehicle age or style. Only non-functional or unsightly vehicles." So basically, my wife said, whatever she personally doesn't like. Exactly. I closed the book, but the more I thought about it, the more it got under my skin. This wasn't just about a car. It was about the principle of it. My car wasn't rusted. It wasn't leaking oil. It wasn't even parked on the street. It was mine, on my property. And if Karen thought she could bully me like she did everyone else, well, she picked the wrong neighbor this time. The next day, I watched her from the window again, clipboard in hand, inspecting everyone's driveways like a general surveying her troops. She paused at my house, frowned, and scribbled something down. That was it. The declaration of war had been written in pencil. I didn't know when or how she'd strike, but I knew she would. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because if Karen wanted to play the HMA game, I knew how to play it better. It happened 3 days later. I came home from work, tired, sunburned, and ready to relax. I parked my truck, grabbed my lunch cooler, and headed toward the front door, but froze mid-step. There, fluttering slightly in the warm breeze, was something bright yellow taped to my door. At first, I thought it was a flyer, maybe a pizza coupon or a roofing ad. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. Bold, black letters at the top read, "HOA Notice of Violation Vehicle in Non-Compliance with Neighborhood Standards." I just stood there, reading it again and again, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My Mustang was sitting exactly where I'd left it, parked in my driveway, spotless, polished, gleaming like a jewel. I walked toward it slowly, circling it like maybe I'd missed something. No dents. No leaks. No broken glass. Nothing unsightly, in any sense of the word. And yet there it was, the official HOA seal stamped at the bottom of the notice, signed in perfect cursive, Karen Reynolds, HOA President. I went inside, dropped my cooler on the kitchen counter, and unfolded the notice on the table. My wife came in a few minutes later, reading over my shoulder. "She actually did it," she muttered, shaking her head. "She's lost her mind." I exhaled slowly. I mean, what even is a non-compliant vehicle? The car's registered, insured, and in perfect condition. My wife pointed to a line halfway down the page. "Vehicles that detract from community aesthetic standards may be subject to removal." Detract from aesthetic standards, I repeated aloud. That's not even an actual rule. That's just her opinion. We both knew what this was. It wasn't about the car. It was about me. Karen didn't like being challenged, and I'd embarrassed her by refusing to take her suggestions seriously. This was payback, written in HOA jargon. Still, I decided to play it calm, at least at first. I grabbed my phone, took photos of the car, the driveway, the notice, and even the street view. I wanted documentation of everything. Then I texted Karen. "Hi Karen, I just got your notice. Can you clarify what specific code my vehicle is violating?" No reply. So I followed up 10 minutes later. "It's parked in my driveway, not on the street, and there are no visible issues with it. Could you let me know what rule I broke exactly? Still nothing. That silence said everything. That night, I walked outside around sunset. The air was cool, golden light spilling over the rooftops. Most of the neighborhood was quiet, except for the faint sound of sprinklers. I stood at the edge of my driveway, staring at my Mustang, trying to figure out why anyone would see something beautiful as a problem. Across the street, Karen's blinds twitched. I saw her silhouette for a second, standing there, watching. I raised my coffee cup in her direction, half a smirk on my face. If she wanted to intimidate me, it wasn't working. At least, that's what I thought then. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA. It was a follow-up notice, digital this time, with even more formal language. Second notice, immediate compliance required. Vehicle deemed inconsistent with community presentation standards. Failure to resolve will result in further action. I rubbed my temples, laughing under my breath. Community presentation standards. She was making up phrases now. I decided to call her directly. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Hello, this is Karen Reynolds with the Pine Ridge HOA," she said, in that rehearsed, overly polite tone she used whenever she wanted to sound official. "Hi Karen, it's me," I said. "I got your notices." "Yes, I trust you understand the reason for them?" "Not really," I said. "My vehicle's in perfect condition and parked in my driveway. Could you tell me what code number I violated?" There was a short silence on the other end, and then her voice hardened just a bit. "Not every standard is written word for word in the handbook," she said. "Some things fall under aesthetic discretion." "Aesthetic discretion?" I repeated, trying not to laugh. "You mean your discretion?" She sighed. "You can appeal the decision at the next board meeting if you like." "When's that?" "Next month," she said. "But I recommend removing the vehicle sooner. It'll avoid further complications." Then she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone for a long time. Further complications. The way she said it, calm, rehearsed, almost gleeful, sent a chill up my spine. This wasn't over. The following day, I made sure to leave the house early for work. As I drove off, I noticed Karen's car parked across the street. She was sitting inside it, phone in hand, snapping a picture of my Mustang. I actually laughed out loud. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. By that point, it was more annoying than scary. She was clearly trying to intimidate me, to prove some kind of point. But I figured if I ignored her long enough, she'd get bored. Big mistake. When I got home that evening, the yellow notice was gone. I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe someone else on the HOA board told her to back off. Maybe logic had finally won. I parked, grabbed my keys, and went inside. My wife greeted me at the door, smiling faintly. "No more notes." "Nope," I said, grinning. Maybe she realized how ridiculous she's being. She shrugged. "Let's hope so." For the first time in days, I actually relaxed. I made dinner, watched TV, and turned in early. But just before bed, something nagged at me, that silence. That calm. With Karen, calm never lasted. And sure enough, the next morning when I stepped outside, I stopped dead in my tracks. The driveway was empty. My Mustang was gone. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My brain couldn't even process it. The spot where my car had sat for years was just bare concrete and tire marks. At first, I thought it had been stolen, until I saw it. A small white paper taped neatly to my front door. Vehicle towed. Non-compliance with HOA aesthetic standards. Signed again, in perfect cursive, Karen Reynolds. That was the moment the calm, polite neighbor in me disappeared. Because if Karen wanted a war, she just declared it. I'll never forget that moment. The morning air felt heavier than usual, thick, still, almost too quiet. Birds were chirping somewhere distant, but I couldn't hear them clearly. All I saw was the empty driveway, and the faint outline of tire marks where my Mustang used to sit. My brain refused to process it at first. Maybe my wife had moved it? Maybe someone was borrowing it? Maybe, then my eyes caught it. A single sheet of paper taped to the front door, fluttering in the wind. I tore it off, my pulse pounding in my ears. Vehicle towed. Non-compliance with HOA aesthetic standards. Authorized by Karen Reynolds, HOA president. The words blurred as anger flooded my chest. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly crumpled the paper. She didn't just leave another notice. She actually towed my car, my pride, my years of work, my piece of history, right out of my own driveway. Babe? My wife's voice called from inside. What's wrong? I turned around, the paper still in my hand. It's gone. What? My car. It's gone. She actually did it. My wife came rushing out, her expression flipping from confusion to disbelief the second she saw the empty driveway. She didn't. She did. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The morning sun glared off the pavement where the Mustang had sat just hours ago. Then my wife whispered, "That witch." I went straight inside, grabbed my phone, and called the number listed at the bottom of the paper, the towing company. It rang twice before a man answered. "Greenline Towing, how can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You towed a 1968 Ford Mustang from Pine Ridge Lane this morning. Can you tell me why?" He paused. I could hear the clatter of keyboards in the background. Yeah, we did. HOA authorization. Standard removal." Standard removal? I snapped. That car wasn't on public property. It was in my driveway. That's private property. The man hesitated. "Well, sir, we were given written consent by the HOA president. She said it violated neighborhood vehicle policy." I nearly laughed out of pure disbelief. "So if someone writes a note saying take my neighbor's car, you just do it?" "Sir, we don't get involved in disputes," he said quickly. "If it's an HOA-approved action, we comply. If you have an issue, you'll need to take it up with them directly." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My wife stood there, watching me pace the kitchen like a caged tiger. "What did they say?" "They said Karen authorized it." Her eyebrows shot up. "Can she even do that?" "She can't," I growled. "At least, not legally." I snatched my keys off the hook. "I'm going to get it back." The impound lot was about 10 miles away. The whole drive there, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Every mile, I replayed Karen's smug face in my head, her fake smile, her condescending tone, the way she always acted like she was above everyone else. By the time I pulled up to the lot, my patience was gone. A man in an orange vest waved me toward a small office trailer. Inside, a fan rattled in the corner while another employee scrolled on his computer. "Can I help you?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah," I said, slamming the paper onto the counter. "You towed my car. A blue 1968 Mustang. It was in my private driveway." He typed for a few seconds, then nodded. "Yep, we got it. H&A order. You'll need to pay the impound and release fee, $475. $475. He shrugged. "Storage fee adds up every day. You're lucky it wasn't overnight." I wanted to explode, but instead I bit my tongue, paid the money, and followed him through the gate. And there she was. My Mustang sat near the back, dust on the hood, chains still around the tires. She looked out of place here, surrounded by rusted junkers and wrecks, like a diamond tossed into a gravel pit. I walked up to her slowly, hand resting on the cool metal. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All those years of restoring her, all the long nights, the grease-stained hands, the sound of that engine roaring back to life, and some petty HOA tyrant had treated her like trash. I felt something inside me harden right then. This wasn't about a car anymore. This was personal. When I got home, Karen was outside watering her perfect little flower bed. She turned when she saw my truck pull up, and that smug smile spread across her face. "Oh, you got your car back," she said sweetly. "That was fast." I stepped out, jaw tight. "You had no right to tow it, Karen." She shrugged, adjusting her sun hat. "Actually, I do. HOA vehicles must reflect community standards. That one didn't." "Community standards?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You mean your standards?" "Call it what you like," she said. "Rules are rules." I took a step closer. "You made that rule up. There's no mention of aesthetics in the bylaws." Then maybe it's time we updated them, she said with a smirk. Consider this proactive enforcement. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears. I wanted to yell, to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her power games. But then, something stopped me. Because yelling wouldn't fix anything. And it definitely wouldn't get even. So I forced a smile instead, slow, calm, deliberate. You know, Karen, you're right. Rules are rules. She blinked, confused. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing, I said, turning toward my garage. Just that you'd better hope you're following every single one of them. That night, I sat in my garage, staring at my car, the one she tried to take from me, and an idea began to form. See, what Karen didn't know was that I worked for the city's zoning department. I spent my days reviewing building permits, property codes, and municipal violations. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was find the rules people pretended didn't apply to them. And something told me. Karen wasn't as clean as she liked to look. She wanted a war. Fine. She was about to find out what happens when the person she tried to push around knows the system better than she does. Saturday morning came too early. The sun hadn't fully climbed over the rooftops when I opened my laptop and logged into the city zoning portal, my digital playground. It's where I spent my weekdays checking permits, ensuring construction followed city codes, and signing off on compliance requests from homeowners and developers alike. But that morning, I wasn't doing city work. No. I was on a personal mission. I typed in our HMWay's subdivision name, Pine Ridge Estates. Karen Reynolds. HMWay President. Address, 121 Pine Ridge Lane. There it was, her property file. And right away, I noticed something odd. According to the records, her house had an unpermitted structure addition, noted from 2 years ago. It was flagged for further inspection, but never closed out. I clicked through the details, and my eyes widened. Apparently, Karen had built a backyard shed, nearly the size of a small garage, without proper approval. Interesting. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. She'd called my restored Mustang an eyesore. She'd accused me of lowering property values. She'd towed my car from my own driveway. Yet here she was, with an unapproved structure big enough to host a family reunion sitting behind her house, something the HOA rules clearly forbade. I smiled. Well, Karen, let's play by your rules, shall we? I didn't go straight for the throat. No, that wasn't my style. Karen was the type who thrived on confrontation. She'd love for me to storm into another board meeting or cause a public scene. But I had patience. And access. So I filed a formal complaint anonymously through the city system. It wasn't malicious, just factual. Unpermitted structure located on private residential property. Possible code violation under Zoning Article 14, Section C. Then, I waited. By Monday afternoon, the city's inspection department had already flagged it for review. Karen, of course, had no clue who reported her. I could only imagine her face when she got that first notice taped to her door, the same kind of notice she used to plaster on everyone else's. And sure enough, by midweek, the HOA group chat exploded. Someone posted a blurry picture of a bright orange violation tag stuck on Karen's fence. "Is this real?" one neighbor wrote. "Karen got a city notice?" Another replied. "Guess even presidents have to follow rules." The messages came faster than I could read. I scrolled, smirking. The queen was losing her crown. But Karen wasn't the kind to back down quietly. The next morning, as I was washing my Mustang, she came marching across the street, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding her fury. "Good morning," she said tightly. "Enjoying your car, I see." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Sure am." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I noticed you've been unusually quiet lately. I was starting to think you'd finally learned your place." "My place?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen. I know you're upset about the towing, but you violated HOA standards. If you just followed the rules like everyone else, none of this would have happened." I couldn't help but chuckle. "You mean your rules, Karen?" Her jaw clenched. "They're community standards." "Oh right," I said. "And I suppose that big shed behind your house, the one without a permit, is part of those community standards too?" For the first time, her face froze. Her lips parted, just slightly. "Excuse me." I shrugged casually. "You might want to check your mail. The city's getting pretty strict about unpermitted structures lately." Her expression shifted, from confusion, to realization, to pure, contained rage. "How do you know about that?" she hissed. "Oh, just neighborhood gossip," I said lightly, heading back toward my car. "You know how fast word spreads around here." For the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. She turned sharply and walked off, muttering something under her breath. I stood there, smiling to myself. That was the first crack in her armor. But it didn't stop there. Over the next week, the city sent her multiple notices. An inspector visited twice. Every time, neighbors peeked through blinds and whispered. Karen tried to play it off, hosting board meetings, walking around with that same clipboard like nothing was wrong. But her composure was slipping. At one point, I overheard her arguing on the phone in her driveway. "No, it's ridiculous," she snapped. "It's been there for years. They can't just fine me for it now." Her voice carried across the street. I smiled, polishing my car's fender. Karma had a beautiful engine hum. Then one evening, my wife nudged me. "You've been grinning like a cat all week. What's going on?" I told her the truth, everything. From the zoning record to the anonymous complaint. She covered her mouth, eyes wide. "You didn't." "Oh, I did," I said with a grin. "And the best part? She still has no idea it was me." My wife laughed, shaking her head. "You're terrible." "Maybe," I said, "but she started it." A few days later, the city sent Karen an official stop-use order. Her shed, which she used to host HOA files and equipment, was now off-limits until it passed inspection or was removed. And suddenly, the HNA was in chaos. Without her office, she couldn't access half her records. Meetings were postponed. Notices stopped appearing. The entire little empire she built on paper rules started crumbling from the inside out. That Saturday, I caught her pacing her yard again, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp and frantic. "I don't care what it costs, just get it cleared. I'm not paying another fine." I sipped my coffee from my porch, pretending not to notice her meltdown. But when her eyes met mine across the street, I smiled and gave her a polite little wave. That was when I saw it, that same smug smile she always wore, now cracked at the edges, trembling. She turned away fast, retreating into her house. And I knew then, this wasn't over. Not yet. Because while she was busy scrambling to fix her own mess, I was just getting started. If she wanted to play dirty with rules and authority, I could play that game too, and I played it better. The difference was, when I was done, she wouldn't just lose her power. She'd lose the illusion that she ever had it. By Monday morning, the neighborhood was buzzing again. Word had gotten around. Karen's property was getting inspected. The queen of HOA perfection, the same woman who fined people for leaving trash cans out 5 minutes too long, was about to be judged by the city herself. I didn't even have to spread the rumor. It spread like wildfire all on its own. "Did you hear? They're sending an inspector for her shed." "Wait, she didn't get a permit?" After all that talk about community image. By the time I stepped out to grab the mail, half the neighborhood was pretending to water their lawns, waiting for the show. Around 10 a.m., a white city truck rolled up. Out stepped a middle-aged man in a reflective vest, clipboard in hand, and a calm professional expression. He parked in front of Karen's house, glanced at the address, and walked toward the gate. Karen was ready. She stormed out of her front door before he even rang the bell. Her voice carried down the street. "Good morning. I think there's been some sort of mistake." I leaned casually on my mailbox, pretending not to listen. The inspector shook her hand politely. "Ma'am, I'm here about a structure on your property. We received a report regarding unpermitted construction." Karen smiled tightly. "Oh, that old thing? It's just a storage shed. It's been there for years. Nothing illegal about that." He glanced at his clipboard. "According to city code, any detached structure exceeding 120 square feet requires a permit and inspection before use. Yours is listed as approximately 400. Karen's smile faltered. 400? That can't be right. He flipped a page, showing her aerial photos. "Ma'am, These were taken during last year's property survey. I couldn't hear every word, but I could see everything. Her hands were flying, her voice rising, her face going redder by the second. A few minutes later, the inspector asked to step inside the yard. Karen hesitated but finally opened the gate. The moment the door to her shed swung open, the inspector's eyebrows went up. From my porch, I could see what he saw: rows of file boxes, old printers, HOA binders, even folding chairs stacked along the walls. That shed wasn't storage. It was her unofficial HOA office. And worse, the structure had wired electricity. He pointed at the junction box on the side. Karen's voice grew more frantic. "Oh, that's just for lights. It's nothing serious." He scribbled something down, then said the words that made every neighbor's ear perk up. "Ma'am, this is a code violation. It'll need to be disconnected immediately. You're also looking at a potential fine for unpermitted electrical work." Karen's jaw dropped. "A fine? You can't fine me. I'm the HOA president." He looked up, perfectly calm. "That's nice, ma'am. But I work for the city." Across the street, my wife whispered, "Oh my God, is this really happening?" I smirked. Yup. Front row seats. The inspector spent another half-hour measuring, taking photos, and taping a bright orange stop use notice on the shed's door. Neighbors began to wander by, pretending to walk their dogs. A few waved awkwardly as they passed. Someone even filmed a short clip for the community Facebook page. Karen, realizing she had an audience, tried to save face. "Everything's under control," she called out, voice shaking slightly. "Just a routine checkup." But no one was buying it. After the inspector left, she stormed across her lawn toward me, fury in her eyes. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. I kept my tone cool. "What's that?" "You know exactly what. You're behind this. You're the one who called them." I tilted my head. "Karen, that's a serious accusation." "Don't play dumb," she shouted. "You've been out to get me ever since that car incident." I stepped off my porch, meeting her glare. "Actually, Karen, I've just been following your example. You know, rules are rules." "Isn't that what you said?" Her face flushed crimson. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But for now, it looks like you're the one getting the toe treatment." Her lips twitched. "What does that mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said with a shrug. "Just that I hope you parked that shiny Lexus of yours properly. I'd hate for it to get moved somewhere it doesn't belong." She froze for a second, then stormed off, muttering under her breath. That night, the HOA group chat went wild again. Someone posted a photo of the orange violation tag with the caption, "Guess who's breaking her own rules?" Another replied, "Karma drives a Mustang." Even people who used to side with her began questioning her authority. How can she enforce anything when she's violating code? "Maybe we should have new leadership." She fined me for leaving my hose out. Now look at her. The tone had shifted. Karen wasn't feared anymore. She was mocked. By the end of the week, the city fined her $2,500 for the unpermitted structure and electrical work. They gave her 30 days to either demolish it or bring it up to code. 30 days. And I knew exactly what she'd do: fight it, of course. Because Karen never backed down, even when she was clearly wrong. But this time, the cracks were showing. Her once perfect lawn was starting to brown. The flowers she used to tend religiously were wilting. Even her precious clipboard disappeared for a few days. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. That Friday evening, as the sun dipped low, she came outside to grab her mail. For the first time in months, she didn't even glance my way. No glare, no smug remark, no fake smile. Just silence. And that's when I realized something: the fight wasn't over yet. Not for her, and definitely not for me. Because Karen wasn't the kind to accept defeat. She'd regroup, plot, and strike back when she thought the heat had died down. I could feel it in my gut. This was just her retreat, not her surrender. And something told me, when she came back, she'd aim lower than ever before. But I was ready. Because this time, I wasn't just reacting. I was waiting. And the next move would be mine. For a few blessed weeks, Pine Ridge Estates went quiet. No notices taped to doors. No mass emails about neighborhood harmony. Just peace, the kind I hadn't felt in years. But with Karen, peace never lasted long. It was a Tuesday evening when I noticed the shift. Her Lexus was back in the driveway, washed spotless. Her flower beds, recently wilted, were suddenly bursting with color again. And most telling of all, she had that look again. That smug, scheming sparkle that always meant one thing: she was up to something. The first sign came in the form of a bright yellow envelope stuck under my wiper blade. Notice of community violation reason: unauthorized commercial activity on private property. I blinked. Commercial activity? Inside, in her usual passive-aggressive tone, Karen had written, "Operating a vehicle restoration business from a residential property is strictly prohibited. Neighbors have reported multiple cars being worked on in your driveway. Cease immediately or face HMA penalties." I almost laughed out loud. She was really reaching now. The multiple cars she mentioned? 2 were mine, my Mustang and my wife's SUV, and the third was my cousin's old pickup, which I'd been helping him fix up on a weekend. I wasn't running a business. I was just helping family. But to Karen, anything that threatened her control was a personal offense. That night, I scanned the HMA bylaws, every clause, every amendment. Nowhere did it say residents couldn't repair their own vehicles. The rule only prohibited commercial activity involving customer traffic. I had 0 customers. So the next morning, I decided to play it smart. I took pictures, time-stamped clear, showing the quiet driveway, the lack of any business activity. Then I typed up a formal rebuttal letter addressed to the HMA board, which conveniently still had Karen presiding. This claim is factually incorrect and baseless. There is no evidence of commercial activity on my property. I request the immediate removal of this false citation and written acknowledgement of error. I hand-delivered it, directly into Karen's mailbox. By the weekend, she doubled down. Another notice appeared. This time, noise complaint, repeated engine revving. My wife rolled her eyes. "She's really doing this again?" "Yep," I said, folding the paper neatly. "And she's about to regret it." See, Karen hadn't realized something. After her shed scandal, the HOA board had started watching her closely too. She might still have the title of president, but the other members had lost faith. They were tired of her power trips and public embarrassments. So I forwarded both her fake notices to the board secretary, Jim, an older retired accountant who'd always been neutral. Within an hour, he replied, "Thanks for sending this, Mark. We weren't aware she'd issued new citations. I'll bring this up in the next meeting." I smiled. Perfect. 2 days later, the next HOA meeting rolled around. It was supposed to be routine, but the air inside the clubhouse was thick. Neighbors filled the seats, whispering. Some were angry, others just curious. Karen sat at the front table, clipboard in hand, trying to act composed, but you could see the tension in her jaw. Jim stood up and cleared his throat. "Before we begin tonight's agenda, I need to address a recent issue of concern regarding improper citation issuance." Karen froze. He continued, "It appears that a resident, Mr. Mark Thompson, received 2 notices, neither of which were approved or recorded in HOA minutes. Mrs. Reynolds, can you explain?" Karen's face turned pink. "Yes, I issued those myself. It's within my authority as president." Jim shook his head. "Actually, according to HOA Policy Section 4.2, all citations must be reviewed by a quorum vote before being delivered. You bypassed the board." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, Jim, you know how slow the process is. I was just enforcing standards." "Unapproved enforcement," Jim corrected. "You also cited him for a business operation without evidence. Do you have proof?" She hesitated, glancing at me. "Neighbors reported it." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Which neighbors?" I'd rather not name names." "Because there aren't any," he pressed. The room went silent. I sat there calmly, arms crossed, while Karen squirmed. Then I pulled out my phone and said, "If it helps, I've got time-stamped photos showing there's no business activity on my property. I can email them to everyone right now." Several people nodded approvingly. One neighbor muttered, "He's always just fixing his own car." This is ridiculous. Another whispered, she's obsessed. Karen's composure shattered. This is harassment, she barked. You're all turning against me because of one mistake. Jim sighed. It's not one mistake, Karen. It's a pattern. Unauthorized towing, false reports, city violations. This board can't keep looking the other way. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. By a margin of 6-1, the board suspended Karen's enforcement privileges, pending further review. Her mouth fell open. You can't do that. I'm president. Jim calmly replied, not anymore. The room erupted, whispers, murmurs, a few quiet claps. Karen gathered her papers, face red, and stormed out without another word. Later that night, I saw her porch light flick on. She was sitting there in the dark, motionless, staring across the street at my Mustang. For a brief moment, I almost felt sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered her laughing when the tow truck took my car. The smug way she said, rules are rules. Now, the rules had turned on her. By the next morning, the neighborhood atmosphere felt lighter, like someone had opened a window and let fresh air in. Neighbors waved again. Kids played outside without being scolded. And for the first time in months, everyone smiled at each other. Karen? She barely came outside. Her car sat in the driveway untouched. The clipboard disappeared. It was poetic. But I knew better than to believe it was truly over. People like Karen never quit, they just regroup. And when they do, they come back desperate. The only question was, how far would she go next? Because something told me, the real storm was still coming. When Karen marched back into the neighborhood the next morning, she looked like a storm cloud in human form. Her usual smug expression was gone, replaced by a twitchy, red-faced mix of panic and fury. I was out front again, this time washing the Mustang with a grin that probably irritated her more than anything. Her car, that shiny silver Lexus she loved to flaunt, was gone. Not in her driveway. Not around the block. Not anywhere. She stopped right at the edge of my driveway, nostrils flaring. "Where is my car?" she demanded, as if I had it hidden behind my bushes. I set down the hose, wiping my hands on a towel. "Morning, Karen. You seem stressed." "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped, pointing toward the empty spot in front of her house. My car was towed. Someone called the city. They said it was parked illegally in the street, blocking a fire lane. I shrugged, feigning sympathy. "Well, that sounds like a serious violation. You know, safety first. HOA rules, right?" The vein on her temple started to throb. "Don't you dare lecture me about HOA rules, young man." She cut herself off when she noticed the small crowd beginning to gather. A few neighbors had stepped outside, pretending to check their mail or walk their dogs, but everyone was clearly eavesdropping. It wasn't every day you saw Karen, the woman who once fined someone for grass being too green, losing her cool in public. "Karen," Mrs. Lopez called from her front porch, "didn't you say no one could park overnight on the street?" Karen turned sharply. "That's different." "Different how?" Mr. Patel asked, leaning on his fence with a smirk. "Because it's your car?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That's not, this is all a misunderstanding." I tilted my head. "Well, I heard the city's been doing surprise patrols lately. Must have been just bad timing." That's when she snapped. "You did this," she shouted, jabbing a finger toward me. "You called them. You're behind this." I just smiled. "Karen, I wouldn't know who to call. But I do know that parking in a fire lane is illegal, HOA or not." There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She was used to everyone backing down, apologizing, or caving to her authority. But not this time. This time, the power dynamic had flipped completely. Then, as if on cue, a white city truck rolled up. The same parking enforcement officer who'd helped me the day before stepped out. Karen's expression went pale. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Mrs. Simmons, right? We spoke yesterday about your Lexus?" Karen's voice quivered. "Yes. There's been some mistake. I didn't know about the no parking zone." He adjusted his sunglasses. "Ma'am, the curb's painted red. You can't miss it. We towed your vehicle for blocking emergency access. You'll need to pay the fine and impound fee before you can retrieve it. Karen's composure shattered. Do you have any idea who I am? The officer chuckled lightly. Yes, ma'am. You're the one who called us last week about a vehicle lowering property values. Turns out, we had to look into your neighborhood, and that's when we found your violation. The crowd chuckled. Some even clapped. Karen's lips trembled with humiliation. You can't do this to me. It's already done, he said simply, handing her a yellow citation. Next time, park legally. She snatched the paper, crumpled it, and stormed off back to her house, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. The moment she disappeared inside, the laughter erupted. Mrs. Lopez called out, "Looks like the HMA president broke her own rules." I couldn't help but grin. Guess the universe has a sense of humor. But even as I laughed with the others, I felt a strange calm settle in. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about fairness. For years, Karen had terrorized this neighborhood with petty rules and power trips. She'd fined retirees for faded mailboxes, threatened families over holiday lights, and made parents cry over fence heights. Now, the same system she used to bully everyone had turned on her. That evening, I saw her husband, Bob, outside trying to fix a no parking sign she'd ripped down in a fit of rage. He looked exhausted. Hey, sorry about the drama, he said quietly. She, gets carried away. I nodded. I get it. But maybe it's time someone else took a turn running things around here. He gave a tired smile. You might be right about that. The next morning, an email from the HMA board landed in everyone's inbox. Karen had voluntarily stepped down as president, citing personal reasons. No one was surprised. Some even threw small parties that weekend. And as for me? I took the Mustang out for a drive that Sunday morning, sunroof open, engine roaring, freedom in every gear. As I passed by Karen's driveway, still empty from the impound, I couldn't resist a little smirk. Sometimes, karma doesn't take months or years. Sometimes, it just takes 24 hours, and a well-painted red curb. That morning, as the wind rushed past and the sunlight danced across the hood, I realized something important. Peace doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means standing your ground when someone tries to take your joy. And this time, I didn't just keep my car. I got my peace, and the whole neighborhood got theirs too. The following week, the entire neighborhood felt lighter. You could almost sense it in the air, like a weight had finally lifted off everyone's shoulders. For years, Karen's HOA reign had been a cloud hanging over us all, threatening to rain fines and warnings on anyone who didn't meet her impossible standards. Now that storm had passed, and for the first time in a long time, people were smiling again. Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter outside. When I stepped onto my porch, I saw something I hadn't seen in ages: families chatting across lawns, kids playing catch in the street, even old Mr. Thompson mowing his grass with his shirt off, proudly defying Karen's old dress code for outdoor maintenance. I grabbed a cup of coffee and watched as neighbors started gathering in small groups. Eventually, Mrs. Lopez waved me over. We're planning a meeting tonight, she said. At the community center. About, you know who. I didn't need her to say more. Everyone wanted change, and this time, they weren't afraid to talk about it. That evening, nearly every homeowner showed up. The small room was packed, folding chairs filled, people standing in the back, buzzing with energy. The HOA vice president, Greg, cleared his throat and started the meeting. So he said, scanning the crowd, as you all know, Karen has stepped down as HOA president. A murmur of relieved chuckles rippled through the room. She's asked for privacy, Greg continued, clearly trying to keep things professional. But we need to decide what happens next. We can either appoint a temporary replacement or hold a special election. Before he could finish, Mrs. Lopez shot her hand up. Election. We deserve to vote for someone who actually listens to us. Dozens of people clapped and nodded in agreement. Greg nodded slowly. All right, then. We'll hold a vote. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. Who wants to run for HOA president? For a moment, there was silence. Then, to my surprise, all eyes turned toward me. Me, I said, pointing to myself. Why not? Said Mr. Patel. You actually stood up to her. You got results. Mrs. Lopez added, and you've got common sense, which is more than Karen ever had. A few chuckles filled the room, but the tone was genuine. They weren't joking. I appreciate it, I said carefully, but I'm not really the HMA type. I just wanted her to stop making everyone miserable. That's exactly why you should do it, said Greg, smiling. We need someone who doesn't want power, just fairness. I hesitated. The thought of dealing with paperwork, meetings, and neighborhood disputes didn't exactly thrill me. But then I looked around the room. These were people who'd been bullied, fined, and humiliated by Karen for years. People who just wanted to enjoy their homes in peace. All right, I said finally. If you all think I can help make this place better, then I'll do it. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud or wild, but it was genuine, filled with relief and hope. The vote happened that same night. Greg printed slips of paper from his laptop, and neighbors scribbled down names. When the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. Out of 41 homes, 37 voted for me. Greg stood at the front and announced it with a grin. Ladies and gentlemen, meet your new HOA president, Jake Miller. The room broke into cheers. Mrs. Lopez hugged me. Mr. Patel shook my hand. Even some of Karen's former allies clapped politely. It felt surreal. A few weeks ago, I was just the guy fixing up his car and trying to stay out of HOA trouble. Now, I was in charge of the same organization that had nearly ruined my peace. After the meeting, a few of us lingered to talk about what came next. First thing we need to do, said Mrs. Lopez, is review all those ridiculous rules she made. I nodded. Agreed. No more fines for garden gnomes, no citations for mailbox color, and definitely no towing cars from private driveways. That got a round of laughter. We decided to form a small committee to go through every single HOA rule and either amend or remove the ones that made no sense. By the end of the night, we had a plan, one that would finally turn our HOA into something that served the community, not controlled it. When I walked home under the streetlights, I passed Karen's house. The curtains were drawn, and her driveway was empty again. I didn't know if she'd gotten her car back yet, and honestly, I didn't care. She'd built her kingdom on fear and control, and now it had collapsed under its own weight. That night, I sat on my porch again, the Mustang parked proudly where it belonged. The stars were bright, the air was calm, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to worry about waking up to a warning letter taped to my door. As I leaned back in my chair, I realized something. The best kind of revenge isn't humiliation, it's progress. It's showing the people who tried to control you that you can build something better without them. Our neighborhood had been at war with itself for years, but now, it finally felt like a community again. And that, more than anything, was worth every ounce of drama we'd gone through. Tomorrow, I'd start my new role as HMA president, but this time, things would be different. No more power trips. No more petty fines. Just neighbors looking out for each other. And maybe, just maybe, the next time Karen peeked out her window, she'd finally see what real leadership looked like. Not control, but respect. The following Monday marked my first official day as HOA president. Honestly, I didn't even want a title, I just wanted peace, but I quickly realized that with power came the chance to fix years of nonsense. When I arrived at the community center that morning, I found a small stack of papers waiting on the desk labeled, pending citations. The list was ridiculous. One homeowner fined for a birdbath visible from the street, another for loud wind chimes, and one poor guy for having a garden hose coiled the wrong direction. I let out a long sigh. This was Karen's legacy. By noon, I'd already met with Greg and Mrs. Lopez to draft our reform list. We planned to erase all unnecessary fines, reduce annual HOA fees, allow homeowners more freedom over lawn decor and paint colors. Most importantly, ban private towing unless authorized by the board. That last one got unanimous approval. People still remembered the sight of the tow truck dragging my Mustang away. By late afternoon, word spread fast that changes were coming. Neighbors stopped by to thank me, some even offering cookies or lemonade. It felt good. Like healing was finally happening. But the peace didn't last long. At 6 p.m., just as we were wrapping up our first official reform session, the community center doors flew open, and there she was. Karen. She wasn't the confident, clipboard-wielding tyrant we all remembered. She looked tired, disheveled, like someone who hadn't slept in days. But her eyes still burned with that same fire of entitlement. "Excuse me," she snapped, marching right up to the table. "What is this nonsense about new rules?" I kept my voice calm. "We're revising the HOA charter. Residents voted for it. You can't just rewrite my policies," she spat, slamming a folder onto the table. "I spent years crafting those regulations. They keep this community respectable." Mrs. Lopez raised an eyebrow. "Respectable? You fined me for having a Christmas wreath in February." Karen shot her a glare. "That's because it was off-season decor." The room chuckled. Even Greg tried to hide a smirk. "Karen," I said evenly, "the residents have spoken. The majority voted for reform. You stepped down, remember? The board voted me in as president." Her face flushed red. "You tricked them. You manipulated this whole thing because of your stupid car." I leaned forward. "You towed my car from my own driveway, Karen. That wasn't just a mistake. That was an abuse of authority." Her jaw tightened. "You deserved it. That old junk lowered property values." The Mustang keys jingled in my hand as I stood. Funny. The state inspector who came out said it increased community interest. Turns out, classic cars attract buyers. So thanks, your complaint helped raise our neighborhood's value. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then, in a desperate move, she pulled out a sheet of paper. "This is a formal motion to reclaim my position as HOA president. According to Article 5, Section 2, I have the right to resume leadership if a board president is found unfit or improperly elected." The room went silent. Greg adjusted his glasses and took the paper. "That's interesting. But Article 5, Section 2 was amended last night." Karen blinked. "What?" He smiled politely. "The residents voted to remove the clause entirely, to prevent exactly this kind of power grab." The color drained from her face. Mrs. Lopez folded her arms. "You're not in charge anymore, Karen. Time to accept it." Karen's expression twisted into disbelief, then fury. "You'll regret this. All of you. You think you can run this place without me? It'll fall apart." I stood, steady but calm. "Karen, the only thing falling apart was this neighborhood because of you. We're not your subjects. We're your neighbors. Or at least we were." The silence that followed was thick and final. Karen's voice cracked. "You'll be begging for me to come back when you realize how hard this job is." Then she turned sharply and stormed out, slamming the doors behind her so hard the papers on the table fluttered. No one spoke for a moment. Then Greg exhaled. "Well, that went about as expected." The tension broke into nervous laughter. We got back to work, finalizing the reforms before submitting them to the county office for approval. That night, we posted the new community charter on the HMA website: fair rules, honest leadership, and respect for all residents. The next morning, the difference was visible. Neighbors waved again. Kids chalked the sidewalks. For the first time in years, nobody was afraid to hang a flag, play music, or host a small barbecue. Karen's name was still on the homeowners list, but her voice was gone. Still, a part of me knew she wouldn't stay quiet for long. People like Karen don't give up control, they just wait for the next chance to grab it back. And sure enough, that chance came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. In Karen's familiar handwriting, it read, "Enjoy your little victory, Jake. Let's see how long your precious freedom lasts when the county reviews your garage permit." I smiled as I folded the note. She was still fighting, but this time, I was ready. Because now, the entire neighborhood was on my side. And this time, she'd learned that when a community unites, not even the biggest HOA bully can stand against it. 3 days after that anonymous letter showed up in my mailbox, things took a strange turn. At first, I thought Karen's threat about the county reviewing my garage permit was just hot air, another empty attempt to scare me. But that Friday morning, a white county inspection truck rolled slowly up my street. 2 uniformed inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand, and started looking at my property. I was standing on my porch with a mug of coffee, already half expecting it. "Morning," I called out. "Mr. Miller?" one of them asked, glancing at his notes. We received a report of unauthorized structural modifications to your garage. I smiled faintly. Let me guess, anonymous complaint? The younger inspector chuckled. You could say that. I motioned toward the garage. Come on in, gentlemen. You'll find everything in order. Inside, the space was spotless. The walls were newly painted, the workbench neatly arranged, and every permit was framed and hung on the wall, from the electrical wiring to the ventilation system. I'd made sure of it after Karen's first wave of harassment months ago. The older inspector whistled softly. This is one of the cleanest setups we've seen. I handed them the paperwork. All permits approved by the county, signed and sealed last year. They reviewed the documents, nodded, and shook my hand. You're good to go, Mr. Miller. Sorry for the inconvenience. Happens more often than you'd think. Oh, I believe it, I said, walking them out. You wouldn't happen to tell me who filed the complaint, would you? The older inspector smiled knowingly. Can't say for sure, but the handwriting on the form was aggressive. We both laughed. As the truck drove off, I spotted a familiar shape peeking through lace curtains across the street. Karen, glaring out from her living room window. The look on her face when the inspectors waved and left with smiles was pure frustration. That's when I realized something important. She hadn't just lost her power. She'd lost her audience. Before, she could humiliate people with citations and warnings. Now, all she had left were empty threats, and nobody cared anymore. But Karen wasn't done. That weekend, a rumor started floating around the neighborhood. Someone claimed I'd been embezzling HOA funds. Another said I'd illegally changed the voting rules. Classic Karen tactics, whisper campaigns, the kind she used to keep people scared. Only this time, no one bought it. Mrs. Lopez came by to warn me. She's talking again, she said, leaning on my fence. Trying to turn people against you. I sighed. Let her. The truth always wins out. She grinned. That's the spirit. But you might want to show up to the HMA meeting Monday. She's planning something. And sure enough, Monday night rolled around, and Karen did not disappoint. The community center was packed again. She wasn't supposed to attend. As a former president, she no longer had voting privileges. But that didn't stop her from striding in like she owned the place, a folder clutched tightly in her hands. Before we start, she announced, I'd like to bring a motion to the floor. Greg raised an eyebrow. Karen, you're not on the board anymore. You can't. This is about financial misconduct, she interrupted, waving her folder dramatically. Our so-called president has been misusing HOA funds for personal gain. Gasps rippled through the room. She had their attention. I leaned back, calm as ever. That's a serious accusation, Karen. You have proof? Oh, I have plenty of proof, she said, slapping the folder down. Bank records, emails, discrepancies in expense reports. Greg took the folder and opened it. He flipped through the pages, frowning. Then his expression changed, from confusion to outright amusement. Karen, he said slowly, these are last year's reports, from your presidency. The room went dead silent for a beat. Then Mrs. Lopez burst out laughing. Karen froze. That's not possible. Greg held up one sheet. This check, signed by you, went to a landscaping company that doesn't even exist. Care to explain? Her face turned white as paper. That was a clerical error. The laughter grew. Mrs. Lopez stood up. So let me get this straight. You accuse Jake of embezzlement using your own financial mess as evidence? Karen's voice cracked. He must have. But no one was listening anymore. The room had erupted into murmurs, some angry, others mocking. Mr. Patel stood up. Karen, you've embarrassed this community long enough. It's time you let it go. Greg cleared his throat. For the record, all financial records since Jake took office are transparent and posted online. Anyone can review them. Karen looked around, realizing the tide had completely turned against her. Her grip on the folder loosened, and papers fluttered to the floor. Fine, she snapped. You want to live without rules? Without standards? Don't come crying to me when your property values crash. I stood, calm and steady. Karen, This neighborhood isn't about property values anymore. It's about people, something you forgot a long time ago." Her lips trembled. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just turned, grabbed her bag, and stormed out, again. But this time, there was no dramatic exit, no applause, no muttered support. Just silence. When the door closed behind her, Greg sighed. "Well, I think that settles that." Mrs. Lopez leaned over and whispered, "Think she's finally done?" I smiled faintly. "With Karen? She'll never admit defeat. But after tonight, she's finished, at least around here." That night, the board voted unanimously to audit every transaction from Karen's presidency. What they found later would shock everyone: misused funds, favoritism in contracts, even small administrative fees paid directly to her own account. By the next week, the county had all the evidence they needed. Karen wasn't just facing embarrassment anymore. She was facing real consequences. And as her silver Lexus sat abandoned in her driveway, flat tires, registration expired, it almost felt poetic. The woman who once controlled every driveway, mailbox, and flowerbed had finally lost control of her own life. Sometimes, karma doesn't knock. It just shows up with a clipboard, a fine, and your own signature on the line. A month after Karen's dramatic downfall, our neighborhood had transformed into something I barely recognized, in the best possible way. Gone were the days of anxiety over mailbox colors or the length of grass. Now, the community center buzzed with actual laughter instead of tension-filled meetings. People waved again, kids played freely, and front yards that once hid behind perfectly trimmed hedges were now decorated with flower pots, hammocks, and the occasional inflatable flamingo, all things Karen had once banned. For the first time in years, it felt like home. The county audit had wrapped up earlier that week. The findings were crystal clear. Karen had misused HOA funds for personal expenses, landscaping for her own house, consulting fees paid to herself, and even a $600 community improvement charge that turned out to be her new outdoor fountain. The county sent her a formal notice of violation. The HOA board voted to remove her permanently from all neighborhood committees, and the residents unanimously agreed to never reinstate her in any capacity. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. But what surprised everyone most was Karen's reaction. She didn't show up to the next meeting. She didn't send another letter or start another rumor. She just disappeared. Her blinds stayed closed, her car remained unmoved, and her once pristine garden started to wilt. Sometimes, silence says more than any confrontation ever could. One warm Saturday afternoon, about 2 weeks after the audit results came out, I was polishing the hood of my '68 Mustang when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. It was Karen's husband, Bob. He looked exhausted, older somehow. But his voice was gentle. "Mind if I say something?" "Not at all," I said, putting down my rag. He hesitated, glancing toward their house. "I just wanted to apologize. For everything she put you through. For what she put all of us through, really." I nodded quietly. "You don't owe me an apology, Bob. We all knew who was pulling the strings." He gave a weak chuckle. "Yeah." She let the power get to her head. At first, it was just about keeping things neat, you know? Then one complaint turned into a rule, and one rule turned into 20. Before I knew it, she was running this place like a dictatorship. "She's not the first HOA president to fall into that trap," I said softly. "But she might be the first one to get towed by karma." Bob laughed, genuinely this time. "Yeah. She's taking some time away. Visiting her sister upstate. That's probably for the best." He nodded. "She's realizing what she did. Slowly, maybe. But she'll get there." I offered him a handshake. "We'll keep the neighborhood in good hands. Promise." He smiled faintly. "I know you will." After he left, I leaned against the Mustang and looked around. Kids were riding bikes down the street, waving as they passed. Mr. Patel was grilling with his family. Mrs. Lopez had her grandkids over, splashing in a small inflatable pool. The scent of barbecue and fresh-cut grass hung in the air. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you can only appreciate after surviving chaos. At the next HOA meeting, I stood at the front of the room and addressed everyone. "We've been through a lot," I began. "And I know some of you never thought we'd get here, a place where we can actually enjoy our homes without fear of fines or threats. A few people nodded, smiling. But this neighborhood, I continued, isn't about rules. It's about respect. It's about helping your neighbor when they need it. It's about building something we can all be proud of. Mrs. Lopez clapped. Then the whole room followed. We spent the rest of the meeting approving the last of the new policies, including one I made sure was written in bold at the top of the list. No vehicle may be towed without written approval from the full HOA board and property owner. That one got a standing ovation. Afterward, as people mingled and chatted, Greg came up to me. "You know," he said, "if you ever get tired of being HOA president, you could run for mayor." I laughed. "Let's not get crazy. I just wanted my car back, remember?" He grinned. "Well, mission accomplished, and then some." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, I took the Mustang for a drive through the neighborhood. I rolled down the windows, letting the wind whip through as I passed the familiar houses, each one with its own little touch of freedom restored. I slowed down as I passed Karen's place. The curtains were still drawn, but the front garden had been freshly watered. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand what community really meant. I didn't honk. I didn't wave. I just drove on, quietly, peacefully, knowing I didn't need to prove anything anymore. When I pulled back into my driveway, the porch light flickered on, welcoming me home. And as I sat there, engine purring softly, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had tried to control everyone with fear. But in the end, all it took was a little unity, and a well-timed tow truck, to take that control away for good. Now, the HNA wasn't a weapon anymore. It was what it should have been all along, a community. And for the first time since moving in, I could finally say it with pride: this is home.